Line. Thanks for joining us. Political analyst Pat Nolan's with us this morning talking about the election. Of course, last day of early voting ends today. Then you'll have next Tuesday if you miss it today. Before we get into some of these amendments, thought we'd touch on some of those. Let's take a call from James, waited through the break.
Okay.
James, good morning. Hi, James.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
Good.
Great.
What's on your mind?
I early voted, and I voted a split ticket. And might say Macon County made it fairly easy. Only thing, folks, you do got some reading to do. Bring your reading glasses.
I think you're right, and that's what we're going to talk about here, James.
I'll read the amendment before you go.
Yeah, read it before. All right, so just in case, there may be some people that are getting ready to go vote, and maybe a lot of folks don't pay that close attention, and there's going to be amendments. Maybe let's touch on a few of them and let them know ahead of time. Which one do you want to hit on first?
Well, I think the one that there's been the most talk about and maybe controversy, maybe the closest vote, although I don't necessarily think it's going to be that close, is number one, it basically would enshrine the right to work laws that are already on the books in Tennessee into the Constitution. These right to work laws were adopted across the country after the Taft-Hartley Act back in the 40s and 50s. They basically say you don't have to join a union even if you benefit from the union contract that may be in place within your employer. The governor did send out a letter that had some information that indicated that if they didn't pass this, that people would be forced to join unions. That's not true because the laws that are on the books in Tennessee will still stay on the books.
So this is an anti-union busting amendment.
The other side says that's exactly what it is. It's going to hurt working people, and they don't like it. The governor had to have a big blue ribbon committee with former Governor Haslam. I think other former elected officials have been on that. I thought they'd have a more aggressive campaign. I thought they might even do television and stuff. They haven't done that. That may be a sign that they've got enough polling to realize they're going to do it. Let me make one comment about all four of these amendments.
Okay.
When we amend the Constitution, when you see the vote on election night, it's not just more yeses than nos on the question. The yes votes also have to be more than the majority of the vote cast in the governor's race. So
that's right.
A little math issue for you. When you watch it election night, look at the top two getters, the Republican and Democrat in the governor's race. Now, there's other independent candidates on there, but they're not going to get huge numbers. But if you look at those two, take 50% of that, then you'll know whether the constitutional amendment is passing. And
so it's not just that it gets more. It has to be
50%
of the
plus one vote of the majority in the governor's race. So it's a little wonky.
Glad you said that.
And I remember this was the only time this came into play for me was the first time we did this. This is when we passed the lottery. And also all constitutional changes have to be done in the year of a governor's race, so you can do that comparison. Mm-hmm. That was when Phil Bredesen was elected governor over Van Hillary. And I remember Chris Clark and I sitting up on the set trying to do the sort of the long division to see, okay, if we did it, because a couple times during the night, as the margins sort of went back and forth a little bit in the governor's race, we weren't quite sure they were there. Yeah. There is another way to amend the Constitution, which is the way they did it before, but we'll talk about that later. It involves calling a statewide convention, electing those people, having them meet, then they come back with whatever they want to do, put that on the ballot. That was the preferred way to do it. In fact, we'd never done it otherwise. The system we use now was used for the first time, even though it's been in the Constitution since 1870. It was first used when we did the lottery. That's how we do it all now.
Gotcha. Before we get to the other amendments, you just blast from the past. Whatever happened to Van Hillary?
He's working for John Rose.
Okay. All right. So he's still in politics. He's
yes.
Kind of a power broker behind the scenes, helping folks get elected.
He's an aide, a staff person.
Okay. I didn't know that because he ran for governor.
The last time we had Congressman Rose in the studio, he came in and ran.
Okay. Curious. I just remember the name when you said that. All right. So the other amendments. All right. So you mentioned that one on the unions. A couple of these others, some of them seem kind of straightforward. The amendment to okay. How about this one? Amendment is it number 4? To delete an article of the Constitution which prohibits ministers of the gospel and priests from holding a seat in the House or the legislature.
Several states have adopted this over the years in their Constitution. Remember, most constitutions date back a number of years. Yeah. And they basically said, look, the ministers are so busy saving people, serving God, they don't really need to be in public service. Well, that's not how people necessarily look at it. And over the years, the courts finally said, no, that's not right. And so long before, we talked about this before we went on the air, Harold Love Jr., who's a representative in Nashville's delegation to the state legislature, he is a minister. His job, besides being a lawmaker, is to be a minister. So obviously it's happened. There was a state case that dated back to 1976, where basically the court said you can't enforce something like that. And I think the Supreme Court has done likewise. States have removed this over time, and this is, if you look at it in some ways, it's a housekeeping amendment, and I suspect it's going to pass pretty handily. But I will say one other thing. When it was put in there in 1870, it does occur to me that at that time, the governor of the state of Tennessee was nicknamed Parson Brownlow, and he is a very controversial figure. He was an abolitionist in the state, and of course was a newspaper man out of Knoxville. And it's funny how that suddenly this prohibition was in there against people serving in the legislature that way. So maybe that's not why it's in there, but it's in there.
How about Amendment 3? This one, a lot of states looking at this if there's issues in their constitution about slavery.
Yeah, in 1870, when the Tennessee, which is the Constitution we operate today, Tennessee had to put a prohibition of slavery in order to get back in the Union, and that met the test to do it. But they put something in there that several other states have put in it, and have now over years been taking it out, that basically said, well, you can still sort of use it if you put people in prison. You can still put them either in more or less a state of slavery or an indentured servitude. This would get rid of that situation, although it does still say if part of being imprisoned is to do work like road crews and stuff like that you can still do that, but that doesn't mean it rises to the level of slavery or anything. It's sort of correcting an error that probably shouldn't have been put in there in the first place 150 something years ago. But that's the purpose behind doing that. And one other thing that's also in the Constitution that we don't speak to in any of these things, there's also a prohibition in our Constitution for atheists not being able to serve in public office. That's obviously also going to be
if you're going to allow, that's absurd.
But that the lawmakers didn't decide to put that on the ballot, at least not yet.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, you're going to allow pastors and priests, atheists. No one should be prohibited, I suppose, unless you're a convicted felon, right?
Right.
The line on the slavery issue, I guess what they're going to do is replace it, what's on the books right now, with the following language. Slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited, but as you said, nothing in this section will prohibit an inmate from working when the inmate has been duly convicted of crime. As you said, maybe working on a road crew or something like that.
And this is not a problem this was not just something that was in the Tennessee Constitution. It was in constitutions across the country, but states have been taking steps to get it out of there. Not just now, but in years before now. Just now, Tennessee's just now getting around to making the change.
Okay, did that cover it? Did we get them all?
You've got number 2, basically changes some of the process for how you deal with the governor's incapacitated and can't serve.
That's right.
And how you handle the lieutenant governor moving up and what happens to the state senate while that goes on, who's going to run that. It is probably even more housekeeping sort of thing, but these things had never been spelled out anywhere. Hopefully they never have to be invoked, but just in case they do, they wanted to have a little bit more specificity about what that's all about. I mean, obviously, if a governor resigns, then the lieutenant governor becomes governor. But remember, that's not an elected position. It's elected in the legislature, but it's not elected by the voters. So Randy McNally would become the lieutenant. He's the lieutenant governor now. He would become the governor. But this is sort of an interim basis when he's doing it to say the governor had some kind of surgery or some other kind of problem. He's going to be out for a while, and he signs over the duties to somebody else to do.
So another housekeeping. You know, it's interesting when you talk about, lieutenant governor not elected by the populace, but by the legislature itself. Made me think about what we can and can't vote for. And one thing that is not on the ballot for voters is legalizing marijuana. Now, there's something on the ballot in Arkansas and others. In Tennessee, maybe you can explain to me why this is. The other states, they've been able, in some other states, to vote to pass legalizing medical or recreational, okay? You and I can do it. In this state, that cannot be put to a public vote. It's the legislature that decides whether to legalize it. Well, how is that? Why is it different here?
Well, I'm not sure under what basis they could put something on there. We generally don't do a lot of referendums in Tennessee.
Yeah, that's right.
You see a lot of that in California, and other states allow it.
Yeah.
I suspect.
Is that why?
I suspect there's not a prohibition against doing that in the Constitution. I suspect if the legislature said something like that could go on the ballot, they probably could find a way. But I don't.
So it's not like
I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say exactly.
Okay, but you don't think it's something necessarily in our state constitution that says, for issues like this of commerce or whatever, that's left to the legislature to decide whether or not to legalize legalize a substance. I'm sure it's not that specific,
Well,
but it probably could be done if lawmakers said, hey, yeah, let's put this to a vote. We'll pass a resolution to do this, something like that.
Frankly, I don't think the political will is here for it. You see, when even to do medical marijuana, we've had a number of lawmakers say, hey, I've had family members, this really works, we need to do this. They still feel like, particularly as long as the federal government says these are regulated substances and we shouldn't be, they use the word gateway drug. If you start using marijuana, even if you do it for medicinal purposes, somehow you're going to be starting to do cocaine and other things. That's probably not true, but that's sort of the. And that used to be the way almost everybody thought about it. I mean, in politics, but it's different. And Jason Martin tried to make that a bigger issue within his campaign. To do
it's interesting because the will of the people, and I'm convinced of this, is that if it wasn't a referendum here, it would pass in Tennessee. So I don't get it. Apparently, it's not a big enough issue for the people that support it to hold their lawmakers accountable for not passing it. They've got other issues they're more interested in, and lawmakers figure, well, if I vote that way, someone running against me may say I'm soft on drugs. So I'm just not going to take any chance with it. But trust me, the vast majority of constituents in most of these areas support it, and yet their lawmakers still won't vote for it.
Well, when you see these other things going on with the use of the hemp, stuff like that, and the places in town where you can go and get things that in the past would have been found only in situations where people were smoking and using marijuana in an illegal fashion, the lines are getting more and more blurred, even in Tennessee to a little bit. And maybe eventually that's going to happen, but we're not there yet.
No, we're not. I've said on more than one occasion, we will be the last state to legalize medical or recreational marijuana. It's just the way it is in this state. We'll take a break. We'll be back with your phone calls. We're going to get into some of these candidates right after this.